Before the sun rises over the open prairie, the world is quiet in a way that feels almost impossible today. No engines, no city noise, no glowing screens, just wind brushing across tall grass and the faint creak of wooden wheels resting after a long journey. Imagine waking up inside a canvas-covered wagon in the middle of the American frontier. The air is cool, the ground still damp from the night, and the first thing on your mind isn't emails or alarms. It's breakfast. Because on the frontier, cooking wasn't just about food. It was about survival, comfort, and keeping hope alive for another day of travel. If you enjoy exploring forgotten history and authentic pioneer life, take a moment to subscribe and follow the journey. Every visit to the channel brings another story from the past back to life. Now picture this moment clearly. A family traveling west across the American frontier. Everything they own is packed into a single covered wagon load. Tools, blankets, seeds, and a few simple cooking supplies. The wagon itself is both transportation and shelter. But when it comes to cooking, they must step outside and turn the open land into a kitchen. The morning begins with gathering fuel. On the frontier, wood wasn't always easy to find, especially on the vast plains. Travelers often searched for dry twigs, fallen branches, or anything that could burn slowly enough to cook a meal. Sometimes they even used dried prairie grass or small pieces of driftwood from a nearby stream. Fire was precious, and learning to build a steady campfire was one of the most important skills a pioneer family could have. A small circle of stones might be placed on the ground to hold the fire safely. Inside that circle, sparks begin to grow. A few careful breaths, a bit of patience, and suddenly thin smoke curls into the morning air. Soon the flame grows steady and warm, lighting the camp with golden light as the sun slowly rises over the horizon. Cooking inside a covered wagon journey was never about fancy recipes. It was about simple ingredients used wisely. Most pioneer families carried basic foods that could survive long travel: cornmeal, flour, dried beans, salt pork, bacon, coffee beans, and sometimes dried fruit. These foods were durable, filling, and easy to prepare over an open fire. One of the most common frontier breakfasts started with a cast iron skillet. Cast iron was the hero of pioneer cooking. Strong, reliable, and able to handle the heat of a campfire, it could fry, bake, roast, or simmer almost anything. The skillet would be placed directly over glowing coals, slowly heating while the cook prepared the ingredients. Imagine the sound as a small slice of salt pork touches the hot iron. The quiet morning suddenly fills with the gentle sizzle of cooking fat. That smell, rich, smoky, and comforting, would travel across the camp, waking everyone else in the wagon train. For travelers who had spent weeks on dusty trails, that simple smell could feel like a small moment of home. The melted fat from the pork wasn't wasted. It became the base for the rest of the meal. Cornmeal might be mixed with water and a pinch of salt to form a simple batter. Then spoonfuls of that batter were dropped into the hot skillet, creating rough golden cakes that cooked quickly over the fire. These weren't perfect restaurant pancakes. They were rustic, slightly crisp on the outside, soft on the inside, and incredibly satisfying after a cold night on the prairie. While the corn cakes cooked, another small pot might be placed near the fire to heat water. Coffee was an important part of frontier life. But this wasn't the smooth coffee many people know today. Pioneer coffee was strong, dark, and often brewed directly in a metal pot over open flames. Ground coffee beans were added straight to boiling water, stirred slowly, and allowed to settle before pouring. The result was a bold, smoky drink that warmed travelers before a long day of walking beside the wagon. Cooking during a covered wagon journey also required creativity. Supplies were limited, so pioneers often used whatever the land offered along the way. If the wagon train stopped near a river or forest, someone might gather wild berries, edible greens, or even catch fish. Those small additions could transform a simple meal into something memorable. Imagine the excitement of finding a patch of wild berries after days of dry travel. A handful of berries added to cornmeal batter could turn ordinary cakes into something sweet and special. For children traveling across the frontier, moments like that were treasures. As the meal cooks, the camp slowly comes alive. Horses shift and stomp softly in the distance. Wagon wheels creak as travelers prepare for the next leg of the journey. The smell of food drifts across the prairie, mixing with the scent of smoke and morning air. And in that moment, around a small campfire, beside a covered wagon, a meal becomes more than just food. It becomes a pause in a long journey, a chance for families to sit together, share stories, and gather strength for the miles ahead. One of the fascinating things about pioneer cooking is how efficient it had to be. Travelers could not carry large kitchens or many utensils. Most wagon cooks relied on only a few tools: a cast iron skillet, a Dutch oven, a metal pot, a simple knife, and maybe a wooden spoon. With just those tools, they prepared every meal for weeks or even months on the trail. The Dutch oven was especially important. This heavy cast iron pot allowed pioneers to bake bread directly over hot coals. A small amount of flour, water, yeast, or sourdough starter and patience could create fresh bread even in the middle of the wilderness. Imagine the anticipation as dough slowly rises near the warmth of the fire. Then the Dutch oven is covered with coals on top and below, turning it into a tiny frontier oven. After some time, the lid lifts to reveal a round loaf of golden bread with a crisp crust and warm steam rising into the cool air. For people traveling across unknown land, fresh bread could feel like a luxury. Life inside a covered wagon was not easy. Days were long. Weather could change suddenly. Rain, wind, heat, and dust were constant companions. But cooking together around the fire brought comfort. Meals were moments where travelers could forget the hardships of the trail and focus on the simple joy of eating together. Sometimes wagon trains traveled in groups for safety. In those camps, cooking fires dotted the landscape like small stars on the ground. Each fire told its own story: families preparing beans, frying bacon, baking bread, or stirring stews slowly over glowing embers. And every traveler had their own small cooking tricks. Some knew how to stretch ingredients so meals lasted longer. Others knew where to find edible plants along the trail. These skills were passed quietly between travelers, shared beside fires under wide open skies. If this journey into authentic frontier cooking fascinates you, remember to visit the channel for more historical stories and real-life survival skills from the past. Each video explores another piece of forgotten history that shaped everyday life. As breakfast ends, the camp begins to move again. Dishes are cleaned with sand and water. Cast iron pans are wiped carefully so they won't rust. Fires are extinguished, leaving only faint circles of ash behind. Then the covered wagon creaks forward once more. Inside the wagon, the world feels small wooden boards, canvas walls, and the gentle sway of movement as wheels roll across uneven ground. But outside, the frontier stretches endlessly in every direction. Cooking during these journeys wasn't about perfection. It was about resilience, creativity, and making the most of what you had. Imagine preparing a simple evening meal after walking beside a wagon for 15 miles. The sun is setting. The sky turns orange and purple over the prairie. Travelers are tired, dusty, and hungry. A fire is lit again. A pot of beans simmers slowly. Bits of salt pork add flavor. Maybe a small piece of bread from earlier in the day is warmed near the coals. It's a humble meal, but after a long journey, it tastes incredible. And while the food cooks, stories begin to flow. Travelers talk about the road ahead, the rivers they must cross, the mountains still waiting beyond the horizon. Children listen closely. The fire crackles softly. Moments like these are what truly define life on the American frontier. They remind us that history is not only about battles and famous names. It's also about everyday people, families who packed their lives into wagons and crossed thousands of miles with courage and determination. Their cooking was simple, but it was full of meaning. Every loaf of bread, every pot of beans, every skillet of corn cakes told a story of survival and hope. And today, recreating those meals helps us understand what life was really like during those incredible journeys across the frontier. If you enjoy discovering authentic historical experiences like this, make sure to explore more videos on the channel. Each story brings another hidden part of history back into the light, because sometimes the most powerful way to understand the past is simply to sit beside a small campfire. Imagine the creak of a covered wagon nearby, and picture a meal slowly cooking under the wide open sky. This video is for educational and historical analysis purposes. It does not support or promote any extremist ideology.